That is crazy.
The only thing I can. Must be. It's up there.
You could tell the view over here.
I was. Oh, this is.
Let's not forget.
Oh, here it is.
God. Go chill out.
Oh,
That's funny. Your opinion, but he joins on Zoom.
this doesn't know how it works.
Yeah, I know. But that's fine. We can start. Luckily, we are efficient.
I am down to 12. Well, it's not 10.
No, if he's
I
gonna
think,
start,
yeah.
because he's only at 600 words.
Yeah, so I cut down everything, 600 words.
So you can give him-
We were talking about cross-cultural veterans. Copious.
Yeah, so first I
Rhetorically
wrote,
copious
Sounds like
academic.
he-
I wrote it, I wrote this speech in 1500 words, then I cut it down.
Yeah, that's all you gotta do.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it's a very good skill. to have.
Yeah,
It
probably
really is.
I will add
It'll
something.
benefit you so much. You still have your phone?
I have phone.
Okay. So you're a graduate student or something?
Yes, I am.
In what program?
Computer science. Yeah. Definitely studied 2 semesters in IBAX with Dr. Bushnell. And that was impressive.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. I'm from Young.
That's what I was gonna say.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know how I felt that way.
But yeah, because some people even do not know that race they are.
Well, I used to live in Rome. So
So yeah,
I
that's
do
the
know
reason
where
you-
it
you know
is.
Middle East.
Oh, you're from Young?
Yes.
Oh, okay, okay. I didn't guess, but
Maybe from Turkey or some places.
Oh,
We are,
sure.
we are
Yeah.
like.
No, but that's, but if somebody gets confused with Turkey, they're very offended.
but the people.
There's a long history there.
It's fun.
But the people from Turkey, they have a different, like, face cut, right?
Well, we don't want to generalize. Everybody, you know what, geographically, it's really hard to generalize.
Yeah.
Of everybody. It's just like language, everything,
Yeah,
you
like
know,
when I
carries
came,
into other.
when I came to the US first, many people mistook me as an Indian
Oh, sure.
because we all look the same. Then I had to tell them, oh no, man, I'm from Bangladesh. India is a neighboring country. They're very big and they have lots of people.
It's because most Americans are more familiar with India. than
Yeah.
Bangladesh, right? Yeah. But yes, I do know, we don't really. So I probably know few words.
No, you have some words.
Yeah, I know.
It was 6 sections, 3 in the fall, 3 in the spring. Correct.
The online.
Anybody online?
Still there.
Commissioner PhD and computer science in
PhD. I guess,
Really?
yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Wow, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
You're so close.
So it's stressful to
Really?
get everything.
Yeah. That's the way to, yeah. That's good though. That's a big accomplishment.
Thank you.
Will you go back to your country or your?
I have a position in Florida as assistant professor.
Congratulations.
Thank you so
That's
much.
amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's
Wow.
really exciting.
Which university?
It's Florida Polytechnic.
Okay.
It's in, next, close to Tampa.
Okay. I've never. Never been to Florida.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I have a friend who's at Florida International.
But you should go there.
Yeah.
For sure you should go.
Okay.
I have not been there, but I have met Lisa
Yeah, a long time ago.
at
How are
previous
you?
conferences. I still love your program.
Thank you. That's very nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you again.
It's good to see you again. How have you been?
Yeah, what about you?
I didn't think that any of your colleagues.
No, this is Stephen, this is Ruth, and this is Fahad Hussein. Yeah, and they're in our PhD program.
Oh.
And also Stephen is the.
And you are.
Our graduate
Oh,
student
I'm
who is helping
working
Oh,
here.
and are you doing the next session too?
Yes, I'm here. I mean, until the end of this.
Okay, great. So I'm in this room next.
Okay, great.
So I'm going to come back for some help.
Sure.
So you do writing here. Do you happen to be getting the stuff?
I was the assistant director for last years.
Okay.
Yeah. So I helped the first year writing director and also the upper division writing directors. with
Okay.
some stuff. And I co-taught English 764 with Dr. Holly Hassel.
Okay.
Like our graduate.
It's a graduate program, yeah, where we train the incoming new
Yes.
BDS.
Okay.
Yeah.
We might be hiring in the next couple of years. In Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon State.
Oregon?
Oh, okay, see?
I love mountains.
Keep that.
I love mountains.
No, you love Oregon.
Oh, yeah. Mountains
An amazing
people.
It's a
You
great
know what?
program.
I think you- I think you're gonna be hiring if you flags. And I say, well, you know, you flag some of these mountains. That's honesty.
Yeah.
No, very David also really likes to drive places.
Yeah.
I'll drive to you.
My spouse likes to go do, but he recently walked to the top of a 4,000-foot mountain from our house.
Wow.
Yeah, it was 25 miles. Still, we are right next door to the tallest mountain in Costa Rica. And on a clear day, you can see the volcanoes of the Cascade Range.
Oh,
We're right up against the hills, like with colored peak, you can watch them from our house. So, okay, watch for.
anyone from Colorado or Montana or Oregon? I love
No, Oregon. As you said, the mountains are open to the ocean.
ocean. and-
That's true.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, we got. Yeah.
No, Fahad, you like anywhere that will hire you.
Yeah,
That has a job.
Sorry. Is it A-Z-O-V?
Thank you, Sarah.
So nice to see you
It's
again.
nice.
How things are
Yeah, it's nice to see you too. Thank you. Right, that's amazing. We love that.
Also,
We'll wait for a few minutes just because I know that. Did they finish giving awards?
we just finished the work.
Okay, we'll wait for a few minutes. What? Karaoke, is this a secret side of Fahad that we know? We didn't plan in our time, but we may have some extra time at the end, so we'll just see.
Gotta wait for something. Okay, one second. No, it's just I have a class with so I have a script.
Now I see how it works with us.
Well, there you go.
Do that always.
Bird.
And also, distribution of our station in Hula is,
So you're expecting us to talk about something.
I think I'll do this.
Oh, yeah, that's so strange.
It is.
Oh, wow. It's in the print program, it's correct.
No, when I first looked.
It was correct, right?
Correct, I
So
think.
now it's
I have a
just
vague memory.
something's happened, yeah. What? That's true, yeah. That's fine, we'll give time for that.
Catherine Fry from Toronto.
We're waiting for folks on Zoom. We're just waiting for a few minutes because they just finished the lunch session. So we will start in a few minutes.
Same, now I'm doing you on the app.
Oh, okay.
And you can look at that. You're gonna work on it.
Which is totally on brand.
Wait one more minute and then we'll start. I think the audience is fine, right? Do we want the camera showing us? Can we switch it? Like so that at first we start? Yeah, mostly they're watching the slides.
Yeah.
It's good if they can see that other people are in the room.
Okay, so after your presentation, we'll see a shade.
That'd be great, yeah. Thank you.
That's actually true.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Who's gonna do that? Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start. I know that folks might be coming in a little bit late because of the lunch and stuff. But just in the interest of time and for folks on Zoom who didn't get to enjoy the lunch with us, I don't want to keep them waiting. So I just want to start. My name is Lisa Arnold, and I'm an associate professor at North Dakota State University. I will introduce our panel, and then we'll get right to it. What do I say about myself? So I'm not going to say anything about myself. I'm going to introduce my collaborators. We've got Stephen Disroot, who is a PhD candidate in our Rhetoric, Writing, and Culture PhD program, as well as the director of our Center for Writers. And we have Fahad Hussein, who is also a PhD student in our program. And we have Ibtisam Belmehub, who is joining us virtually, but even more virtually than other virtual people because we have a video of her instead of her live because she is overseas right now. And it's, I think, about 2:30 in the morning her time. So she recorded a video but she is a graduate of our PhD program. And she is has most recently been the executive director of a local nonprofit that serves New Americans in our community in Fargo-Moorhead. So the reason why we are running this panel, or sort of just giving you a sense of what we're doing, it wasn't this most recent academic year, but 2 academic years ago, we put together a faculty learning community on linguistic social justice that worked with faculty across the disciplines to sort of give them some education about things that we think are really important in terms of thinking about language difference, in terms of thinking about how faculty across disciplines can treat, and approach student writing, especially if the language use is different. And all four of us sort of came together just based on a general, shared interest in issues related to language, and interest related to translingualism. And so what we're doing in this panel is basically giving you some of the nuts and bolts to give you a sense of what we did. And then some of the takeaways from our initial faculty learning community, which we piloted. And this is a larger, it's a study in which we gathered data on surveys, interviews, and also participant observation. So I am going to stop talking right now and turn it over to Fahad.
Hi, everyone. This is Fahad. So I'm going to give you the overview and background of our pilot study. So it all started before the fall of 2021. And it started with a vision of building a faculty learning community partnered with the Office of Teaching and Learning at North Dakota State University. So Dr. Arnold came up with the brilliant idea of disseminating information and also educating the different faculties, especially from the STEM faculties, about the linguistic social justice inside and outside the classroom. So then she reached out to all of us about this idea, and we all worked together. And she also drafted a short proposal and submitted that proposal to Office of Teaching and Learning, and they accepted the proposal. And initially we had a workshop set up at the very beginning of fall 2021. And interestingly, on the workshop day, we got 15 faculty members, mostly from STEM disciplines. And the workshop was a success. At the end of the workshop, we also distributed a mini survey and also asked the participants whether they would be willing to participate in the future sessions. So we had a plan for 6 sessions throughout the whole academic year, 2021 to 2022. So we actually started to have some good responses from the participants who were present in the very first workshop. And later we planned for 3 sessions in the fall and other 3 sessions in the spring. So, however, the recruiting session was very crucial. We collaborated with OTL, Office of Teaching and Learning, to advertise the FLC sessions, ensuring that our message reached to wide range of faculty members, including all the professors from the STEM fields. So we knew that we needed a diverse group for our research to share the curiosity about understanding linguistic social justice. Then comes to the IRB proposal development alongside the curriculum. So Dr. Arnold, along with Stephen, they drafted a IRB proposal and submitted it. And also we, all 4 members completed the training, IRB training protocol. And then came the communication part with the interested faculties who actually completed the survey. Then Dr. Arnold actually spearheaded the communication point. So she actually contacted all those interested parties, all those interested faculty members who were who actually showed their enthusiasm and came to the session. So throughout this journey, effective communication played a pivotal role, and would like to thank Dr. Arnold for that. And initially we started with 8 faculty members. And it was reduced by 3 by the 4th session, but these 3, they were very consistent and they actually stayed at the very end of the session, which is at the end of spring 2022. Okay, next slide, please. So, so for the curriculum development and session planning, so we had multiple meetings in our teams before each session about how can we develop the curriculum, what we are going to talk about, what we are actually asking about from the participants. So we also got together
and chalked out all our plans and progressions and outlined the topics. Then in the meantime, the draft of the IRB, all the trainings, everything was completed, and we started our session. And typically before each session, we would have 1 or 2 meetings among ourselves, among these facilitators. And we chalked out all the plans before each session. And different team members contributed to session development. So Dr. Arnold with the bigger ideas, I contributed something with the topic, and Stephen contributed with the surveys and different data collection and everything. And Dr. Belmiho, who is not here with us today, she also helped us and contributed with her analysis too. Okay, for the data collections, so all sessions held asynchronously on Zoom, and it was recorded, except the only thing that we could not record is the breakout room sessions, but we got everything whenever all the breakout room participants came in the main room and they shared their thoughts. We took notes, and also they were filling their surveys, and also we took observation notes and everything. And breakout sessions, after the breakout sessions, there were follow-up meetings to identify themes and observations and participants and engagement throughout the FLC experience. So a lot of the data that we got came from our observational notes, the participants' experience or expression of their experience, what they did, and how they are actually trying to co-opt this very idea of linguistic justice. And also, the 2 of the members were interviewed, and like longer interviews with them, and all the interviews were transcribed and recorded. And this is how we got our data. And for the next part, I will hand it over to Dr.
Thank you, Fahad. That's a really good overview. And something that I realized that we didn't really do is we didn't explain exactly what our sessions were about, which you might be interested in. And we'd be happy to share more information about this if you contact us after the session or in your questions. But I think we spent the first 2 sessions basically introducing our participants to basic scholarship on language diversity. On we actually had them, we gave them some resources like some chapters from Rosina Lippi Green's book, English with an Accent. We talked about what language difference might look like in the classroom, and the various ways we might define language difference beyond just, different grammar or something like that. And so those were our first 2 sessions. Then we moved on to talking about how to think about language difference in relation to the syllabus, and how you might, really incorporate inclusivity, language inclusivity in your syllabus by developing statements, et cetera, that you might include. And then the last 3 sessions were very practical in the sense that we were talking about how you might work with rubrics to better respond to and assess student writing, and how you might integrate issues related to language difference and linguistic inclusivity in your assignments, and also how you might provide effective student written feedback when you do encounter language difference. So that's kind of an overview of the sessions themselves. So I'm, in addition to what I just told you, I'm also talking about some of the challenges and successes that we encountered. And this is really nuts and bolts in terms of logistics, in case you're interested in running something like this yourself, some things to think about. Some of the logistics, we were actually very, I would say, deliberate about how the labor worked and how we used our time, in part because I was working with, this is part of, my job includes doing stuff like this, right? But I brought in my grad students and my former grad student to really, work on these things. So I tended to take on a lot of the back end of the labor, like communicating with faculty, spreading the word, doing all that sort of back end logistical stuff. But we really equally collaborated on the session planning, in terms of dividing up the work, determining who's going to do what. We had very efficient meetings. And we also obviously had to develop some stuff just to gather data to see if this FLC was working, what our participants were wanting more or less of. Stephen really took the lead on the developing those surveys and running them and analyzing them. And of course, you have to make sure you're communicating, especially since this was a year-long faculty learning community. It was important to keep in touch with our participants and remind them in advance of our sessions, et cetera. In terms of facilitation, some of the things that we learned from this experience includes, making sure that we're clear about what our own roles are. We had a lot of, when we did meet after sessions, we did do a lot of reflection about what seemed to be working in terms of our facilitation and what didn't seem to be working. All of us care deeply about these issues of linguistic justice. And at times it is difficult to stay neutral in those discussions, right? Especially, but the purpose of a faculty learning community is really to help guide participants to better understand these issues and then determine what's most appropriate for them in their context. So that was really important. It's something that we worked on and developed over time. And so I would say, like, one of the really important things to think about is just determining what is your position, what kind of engagement do you want to have as a facilitator, and why. In terms of how this works across disciplines, one of the things that we were thinking very carefully about is how do we talk about language difference and linguistic justice with folks who are not writing scholars or who do not know the scholarship that we're familiar with, right? And so one thing that we did was we tried to make sure that examples that we provided, especially positive examples, were taken from a variety of disciplines that were not English. And we also, if we had negative examples, like examples that we wanted to rework or revise, we tried to take them from disciplines that were not our participants' disciplines, just so that they wouldn't feel targeted or like that we were generalizing about their discipline. We did make some requests for materials to be sent to us by our participants in advance so that we could maybe incorporate those. We weren't very successful in getting our participants to do that. They were very engaged during the discussions, but for whatever reason, they weren't yet ready to share with us their rubrics or their assignments that we could help them rework in the facility, in the sessions. So that's something we probably still need to work on and work out. So we ended up developing those things ourselves, taking from freely available rubrics and assignments on the web and reworking them to work for our purposes. We did spend a lot of time really building trust. We made sure that all of us were kind of equally participating as facilitators so that our participants could get to know us. We had breakout sessions when we had a larger group at the beginning so that, there would be smaller group discussions instead of a larger group where, somebody could really disengage. So we really got to know our participants over time. We did give some readings as sort of supplements to our sessions. But those were completely optional. Those were, we might call them homework, but they were not required to understand what we were providing during the sessions themselves. And then, in terms of attendance, as Fahad mentioned at the beginning, we had quite a few participants, quite a bit of interest, and for various reasons, people dropped out, and that happens, of course. But by the end, the second half of our sessions, the 3 participants who did attend were really invested and really engaged, and they were really glad to be there. So, we got to know each other in a really meaningful way. I'm going to hand this over to Stephen, who's going to talk about some of the results of the qualitative research that we did.
Thanks. All right. So getting to the data, how do you do this? Just click. Oh.
It's too complicated for me. No, that's fine. Guys, I went directly to what I want. Okay, so we developed the IRB. Part of the development of the IRB was presenting some research questions, which helped sort of, we have this interfolding of planning the sessions and planning the research. And so these were our guiding questions that we're hoping to answer. I don't think we answered. We have data that really supports any answer to all of them, but we have data that supports answers to many of them. So I'm going to read through the research questions that we were asking in this project. Not that you can't read yourself, but who self-selects for a university-wide faculty learning community on the topic of language bias and language diversity, and why did they do that? What challenges or benefits do instructors across disciplines report regarding implementation of linguistically inclusive teaching practices? What are the effects of discussions about language diversity and language bias on instructors' self-reported pedagogical practices and attitudes towards students? What are the challenges and benefits of university-wide professional development focused on language diversity, language bias? And what professional development activities or discussion topics are most meaningful for instructors across disciplines in understanding language diversity and bias, and why? So just a quick overview. My numbers don't totally agree with what Fahad said. I'm just using the survey data. We began with 10. That's what the survey said. It was in this, we have a little more demographic information here. I just want to give you, have you, sort of imagine who was involved. We have a predominantly white, we have a predominantly monolingual sort of university. So this isn't really a surprise, but 8 women, 2 men, 9 who identified as white, 1 who identified as 2 or more races, and then 7 tenure tracks, and then 2 grad students and 1 staff began participating. It ended up being 3 white women professors. Is that, yeah. But that's what began being interested in this. So the data that we collected were through the surveys that have already been mentioned. So we had a general survey, including who are you, why are you here, what do you think about stuff, that I'm calling the pre-faculty learning community survey. We had one after the entire thing was complete that I'm calling the post-faculty learning community. And then for each session, we distribute a survey, say, what do you think about today's session? We transcribed the sessions that we recorded. It was exhausting, but we did it. And same with the semi-structured interviews. And as Fahad, I think Fahad mentioned that we had 2 people who volunteered to do that. So those were transcribed. Those were the data that we used to sort of explore these questions. So going back to the first data or the first survey, what did we pull out of there to get a sense of where people were, what they were looking at? Again, there's nothing really surprising or profound here, but most of our linguistic diversity was identified as ESL students, international students. Okay, that's pretty much follows the demographics of North Dakota State. Or they also identified students, this was an option, not language they came up with, home language different than mainstream English. They were most concerned about improving their teaching for research papers and group projects. In the narrative responses, just a sort of word cloud you can see in the background there, but students and language were universally talked about in those narrative responses in that initializing survey before we even started. For the session surveys, these weren't very informative for a research purpose, but I guess it's informative that everybody was happy because everybody was happy all the time. But that does make, pulling something out of that data difficult, but it's good. The people who self-selected in probably had reason to be happy, and we'll kind of talk about why that is in a moment. The narrative responses, again, students' assignments were the things that really popped out there. And then the post FLC, so this is after all the entire academic year of these things. There are only 3 people who elected to do this. Very high satisfaction for those who kept with us. And in their narrative responses, they talked about this could help me revamp a course, write better assignments. They thought the linguistic approach, because we really started with that linguistic-y kind of approach. She mentioned Lippy Green, if you're familiar with her. They thought that was really helpful to them. And they thought it supported their general goals for being inclusive pedagogues. So that's kind of the survey data. The more labor-intensive stuff was in the transcripts. So the process, just the methodology there. So we had these transcripts that we couldn't figure out a way to get ChatGPT to do for us, but so we did it. And then Lisa and I coded these. It was kind of an open coding exercise where we took the research questions, started thinking through what we're seeing there. And by like the third session of coding section, we kind of came up with themes, and then we coded through there. And these are the themes that we saw in the data. So I'll read through those, and then I'm going to give you an example from a little sample from the transcripts. And again, those are session transcripts as well as a semi-structured interview transcript. So the themes that we pulled out through coding were: one, communicating expectations to students, the importance of explicitness and the usefulness of having language to talk about language. Two, they saw some tensions, or they talked about tensions between our linguistic inclusiveness stuff and sort of academic languaging. Three, they talked a lot, this was kind of related to language, but they talked a lot about how to humanize the teacher-student relationship. And somehow this linguistic perspective was like, oh, everybody uses different language, so we got to see these students as, languagers or something. I don't know. We'll look at it as a couple examples. And for us translingualists, that one really satisfying one was they started talking about like this deficiency orientation is like bad. It's a distractor from good teaching. And if you're familiar with translingual theory, you can see why we're real satisfied with that. We didn't impose that on them. They kind of came up with it. And the really fascinating, I guess this is kind of personally, the really fascinating thing to me is how the people who sustained through the things talked a lot about how this linguistic inclusiveness really converged with larger personal, professional, and social values that they have. It almost had this moral component in the way they talked about it. So we'll go through a few examples of that just to give you a sense of those codes. And then we'll move on to sort of the takeaways with Ibtisam. So the theme, communicating expectations to students, explicitness, and language about language. Here are a couple of examples of things that we coded that way. So one participant said, I'm going to take a more critical look at the way I talk about participation points to make sure that it's as inclusive as I actually meant it to be. Another participant that got coded this way said, it just blows a door open right now in terms of what is possible for the students. This is just talking about language here. And it gives them the structure or lack of structure or kind of carte blanche as to what they can be doing with an assignment. That's kind of interesting because it's both like we have to be explicit about things, but also we can be explicit about where the freedoms are with the language. And I think that was kind of liberating to have a linguistic justification for that. Another theme, tensions with academic language values, beliefs, and practices. So these are samples of how we coded that. So one participant said, and how do you reconcile the fact that you want there to be linguistic diversity in your classroom, but at the same point in time, you have this responsibility to teach your students to write grants, write manuscripts, present in a professional manner. So there is like a language standard, and you're telling us to be like more forgiving. So how do we maintain that standard? Another participant said, keeping in mind that we're all still bound, we got to give students grades at the end of the semester. So they would talk about how to sort of norm this against their professional standards. So I talked about things that we coded as sort of humanizing the student-teacher relationship and how that sort of emerged in the language discussion. So one example would be, why isn't the instructor potentially just connecting? So identified a problem. So why isn't the instructor just potentially connecting with students to see if maybe there's some miscommunication happening or lack of understanding? So Like it's not the assignment problem, it's not the student problem, it's the relationship between the teacher and the student that can repair that whatever went wrong there. Another participant said, I mean, it could be that you are communicating in a way that is systematically hard for, I don't know, are these students of color? Do they have the same background? Maybe you're communicating in a way that's not helpful for them. So they were just sort of more holistically seeing who those students were as people. The deficiency orientation seen as a distractor, an example of the code there would be, we as individuals, faculty can get really stuck on the grammar and the syntax versus the content. And it's hard to change that depending on what our cultural norm is in our program. Another example of that is, so just refocusing the classroom interactions and work to actually focus on learning as opposed to grading, trying to turn everything before that into more feedback, and give and take and learning as opposed to points and punishment and things like that. So trying to negotiate that through our language discussions. And then the thing that I don't know, was probably the most surprising to me was explicit talking about their general values of inclusiveness and how this FLC experience related to that. So an example that we coded there would be just my talking about why this is important to her. Just my underlying sense of social justice and how I hope that my interactions with students and my colleagues are working to further that instead of contributing to the problem, and to be more inclusive and more of an ally in my teaching and research. Another example would be somebody tying this specifically to her professional experience and her professional values. She said, being a mental health nurse, I think what's normal for me is rooting for like the underdog and always advocating for the underdog, and just making this connection to the FLC experience. So ultimately, returning to our research questions, I'm not going to read through them all. I think we can find some data that supports answering most of these. The one that ends up kind of, I think we got to toss is, which of the activities or topics were more important than the other, because it was just like universally important for those who did it. So, and that, again, relates to that selection bias. Who goes into this thing? It turns out people really care about equity and inclusivity and stuff like that. So we got a video coming up for our takeaways. No. Oh.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So we're going to, where's the keyboard? I got it. We are going to switch over to a video, and to do that, I'm going to stop the share for just a second. Don't be worried, Zoom people, because I'm going to share it again. But this time, I'm going to share the sound and optimize for a video clip. Okay, so we have our other collaborator, Ibtisam. She was unable to join us today, but she did record a video to conclude our presentation and tell us a little bit about some of the takeaways that we thought, if you're interested in doing something like this yourself, if you're thinking about what are the larger implications about this. And of course, this is a very small study, right? So for sure, we would like to run this again. We would like to generate more data, not to throw away that last research question, but actually to gather data that might help us answer that research question. Now we just need more participants. So Ibtisam's going to tell us about what we think we can take away from this.
Welcome everyone, this is Ibtisam connecting from Thailand. You can only see my picture because the lighting in this room is horrible. So I'm gonna just share my screen and I'm gonna have my profile picture instead. So thank you for your patience with these technological accommodations that we had to do for this presentation since I'm out of the country. But I'm happy to be joining Lisa, Fahad, and Stephen for this presentation at IWAC, talking about FLC and linguistic diversity. I'm going to focus on the takeaways and recommendations from this experience that we had with the FLC, talking about learned lessons and moving into the future. So in this section, I'm going to talk about professional development activities and topics that can be discussed based on what we learned from our own experience. I'm also going to cover incentives that can be added to the participant engagement. I'm going to cover facilitation, assessment, takeaways, and pre-analysis that you might want to do ahead of an FLC like this, and then some future research topics that can be added as well. So first of all, professional development activities that can help with your FLC. So the first one is assignment heuristic. This was a really helpful activity for our attendees because it allowed us to think through assignments together, and it was just a very engaging way to include the topic of linguistic diversity with a highly diverse group of participants from different disciplines specifically. So another one is written feedback approaches, how to respond to research papers, written papers, other assignments, and how to make your feedback more accessible to students when it comes to linguistic diversity. Another topic of importance or activity that can be added to an FLC similar to this is implementing and signaling linguistic diversity. Our participants were all interested in how do we show our students that we care about this topic, and how do we show them that we're here to allow them, to give them a safe space to be linguistically diverse. So creating activities that will allow them to test that before they get into the classroom can be very, very helpful. In our context, the readings that we did by Lippy Green were very good to frame our conversation, just questioning language and the standard, and being able to reflect on these topics for faculty who do not probably spend that much time thinking about writing in their courses. We also believe that it's critical to incentivize participation. As you saw earlier, participants did drop. We do not know all the reasons why that happened. It was our first attempt, but we really believe that if we incentivize the participants one way or another, it would encourage them to better be included, involved, and stay for the duration of a FLC. So financial bonuses through the departments or colleges, some sort of certification, maybe saying that you have this training now in linguistic diversity or anti-racism pedagogy, something that can be recognized, within the department, university, locally, in the discipline, whatever works, just to encourage people to be motivated to actually participate. Professional development, again, same thing, something that can be valued in their disciplines and colleges. Engaged networking across disciplines. We think that, we can frame these FLCs as a way to learn from other disciplines, innovative ways of doing our own work. So I think that can be valuable as well, even if we're not, maybe able to provide financial bonuses or certifications that are deemed valuable. When it comes to facilitation, it is very important to define what that means. Who is a facilitator? What can they do? What can't they do in their role in the conversation? So speaking time is one of the things that should be thought about and well defined ahead of time. Labor division, who's doing what? Plan, review, and reflect. Again, in this FLC, as we saw earlier, our group has really met several times to plan together. Review just happened in a previous FLC, and reflect on how to move forward. So I think that really helped us be intentional about where the FLC was and where it was headed. Disciplinary differences, just keeping in mind that, you know, we come with our background on language and language diversity and humanities, but we don't know how everybody comes to define linguistic diversity even. So it is important to have an open mind and define and be curious about what it means. Align facilitator roles with FLC purpose. So making sure that if your FLC's goal is to inform and teach, that you have some time for that. But if your FLC's role is to learn from your participants, then giving ample time for participants to share and for facilitators to have less speaking time, for example. The way we scheduled it was over 2 semesters, and we think that scheduling over 1 semester would be a lot better because it just kind of keeps things contained within one schedule, and maybe that will help with retention of participation. Next is assessment and pre-analysis. So for this part, we're just gonna think about topics that we're gonna cover in an FLC, making sure that everything is pre-selected and relevant. FLC location and institutional context, whether a university is highly diverse, like 80–90% BIPOC students and faculty versus mostly white mainstream population. Those are very, very different contexts on how you even structure an FLC. So just bearing that in mind and doing a little pre-analysis and assessment of your environment, your institutional context. Storytelling and as data is, I always believe, very critical. I know we always think about numbers and we want to do qualitative methods, or quantitative methods, but I believe that stories should be considered data, because how else do we know people's experiences? So if we can gather those at the beginning, it will inform the FLC much better, and even throughout the FLC as well. Which students and context might benefit from linguistic diversity? And to kind of add to that, which students, but also how. We believe that every student would benefit from it, but how is it different from certain experiences to others? Just kind of researching that and being aware of that before we get into the FLC, or again throughout the FLC as well. Future research, some things that we thought about were considering how other disciplines might perceive language diversity differently. Again, we come from our perspective, from the humanities. We don't necessarily know exactly how people define language diversity or why it's important to them. And so it would be very, very critical to know that. And that is something that future research, we think, should embark on figuring out. Consider the role of facilitators. We want to make sure that we're signaling allyship, but also, you know, what does a facilitator mean? What is the goal of FLC, and how can that role be aligned with that? I think with this term, or with these roles of the facilitator, we're also thinking about, is it the role of the facilitator to also teach and redirect, or is it the role to just listen? And again, that we believe is based on context and based on your goal for the FLC. So those are very critical pieces to define ahead of time. Recognize a paradigm shift that we are asking participants to consider. If your intention is to gather people from across disciplines and talk about linguistic diversity, it is very likely that everyone is in a very different place on what that means and where they want to go with it. And so it's very important to realize that this is going to be hard work, and to just give people time to process and think and reflect and share, so that they can actually do learning throughout the FLC. That is all I have for my section. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ibtisam, even though you're not here. Okay, let's see here. All right, I'm going to stop the share. And I'm going to start the video. Oh, it says it's unable to detect the camera. What does that mean? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and start. Folks on Zoom, we can see you on our screen. I mean, your black boxes. So if you want to pop on and ask us any questions, you're welcome to. This is it. I mean, this is what we've got. We just wanted to give you a sense of what we did and why we did it and what we learned. So we're curious about your questions, and are happy to address them. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, wait, I'm going to run over with the micro mic.
I was interested in the feedback that you had gotten about the tension that they were feeling between like the requirements for academic language and then what you all were teaching. And I have felt that myself in my own faculty development work. But I feel like sometimes I'm telling them things that go contrary to what they have to do. So I was wondering if you felt that tension yourself and that concern and how you dealt with that.
Great question. I think, a lot of times it doesn't really matter the topic, but when you're talking about writing and the teaching of writing with faculty outside of our discipline, there is always tension, right? And then you add on to it something that's actually, like Ibtisam mentioned, a paradigm shift in thinking about language, right? There are all these tensions. I don't know if either of you want to address that first.
So that tension, I think, got expressed in two ways. One was the tension with, okay, I got to get my students to publish in a journal. So how do I reconcile this with these values that you're promoting? I kind of agree with. I don't know how to reconcile that. So there was a tension with like the topic and this practical goal, and totally understandable. There was a different tension that wasn't necessarily with us. It was with the participant and their own, going back to their own program. Like, I believe this, I'm going to do this, but then I have these faculty meetings where they say, no, we all have to have the exact same rubric. And this rubric doesn't work for the values I have, and now the linguistic justification you gave me for those values. So, what they do with that tension back in their department, I'd be curious. That would be a follow-up study that would be really interesting. And I know that one talked about her intention to bring this as ammo back to her department. So there are a couple different ways that tension got expressed. And I would say like the one where is tension against like us or the topic. It was more like exploring, like, what does this mean? I have these two things that are important to me. How do I do that? And that was spoken out loud. And I think speaking to one of our takeaways, the facilitation thing, I think we kind of made a mistake in trying to intervene in that tension, and we should let him just like spin it out and talk it through, because it was very interesting. No.
And I will just add, I want to recognize too, even in our own discipline, we haven't resolved that tension, right? I think people are still working out how to negotiate these issues, right? So I think it kind of is reflective of what we're all trying to work out when we're wanting to be cognizant of language diversity. We're wanting to be linguistically inclusive. And then how do you do that in practice, right? I think those questions are still open questions in our field. So That was pretty interesting. And the other thing I just wanted to mention really quickly, since we didn't quite mention it, it was a little bit on one of Stephen's slides, but none of our participants were from English. And the three who we ended up, having throughout the whole time, they were from the fields of nursing, political science, and public health. So pretty disparate disciplines, and just in case you're curious about who was represented. So yeah, any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I was really interested, you talk about, like, especially in your title, it's like this idea of communities. So I wondered how you made this feel like a community when it's such different people that just, it sounds like they just kind of showed up. It's not like they all came in a cohort of some sort or anything. So how you brought them to feel like a community, how you built trust, and then how that kind of affected, you think, the atmosphere. How much did they use that and like learn from each other, or were there tensions there?
That is a great question. Fahad, do you have anything to say about that? Okay, thanks for your question.
Thank you. That's a great question. So we try to, so whenever we advertise through the OTL website, so we got some like really curious people from different disciplines, but we try to build trust throughout implementing our ideas, or just giving them the ideas that you're like all our teachings, all our assignments, or whatever we talk about inside the classroom, we need to make it linguistically inclusive so that any student, whether he or she is from India or Nepal or from other part of the world, or whether a student from African American origin, we do not want the students to feel isolated or feel slighted or something like that. So we were actually trying to implement the idea that whenever we draft an assignment sheet, or whenever we draft the rubric, or whatever we do to facilitate our teaching, we need to be very language conscious or linguistically like inclusive, so that everybody feels, all the students feel very comfortable inside our classroom. So, and before these, Dr. Arnold also drafted a language statement that we included. We also shared it with our FLC sessions and the participants, that we have started these in our English department. Dr. Arnold does this in her syllabi, and also I do this in my syllabi. We have a language statement where it says that all languages are beautiful. So do not feel shy or something if you say English, or if you use another variety of English or something like that. So that's a good start from ourselves. So we try to build trust through this dissemination.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think we kind of weren't sure how things would go at North Dakota State University, right? Bring to where, I know Chris won't bring any assumptions about North Dakota because he was there before. Different university, but same state. But we weren't sure if this would be something that folks responded to well, or they would resist, or we weren't sure what the uptake would be. But ultimately, folks self-selected, right? There are genuinely a good number of folks on our campus who genuinely care about social justice, anti-racism. And I think these ideas were really important to them and interesting to them. And so I think they all had that shared kind of goal or purpose from the beginning. So we didn't encounter somebody trying to derail our work in this FLC. We might have in a different context if everybody were forced to take this FLC or something like this. But I think we were able to sort of start from a place and a premise of we want to improve equity on our campus. We want to make things accessible and inclusive. So I think that was a benefit.
Just to combine those, I mean, I think there was a recognition for community. There was like the people who participated, like, oh, you and I were on the same page here. So again, we didn't do much with that, But that is something to think about. Like if we were going to recruit 24 people for a sustained faculty learning community, how do you build that community? I think it would be better if it were in person. I think it'd be better if there were food. But otherwise, the shared values is what did all the work for us.
Yeah, food always brings people together.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. First, a question. I'm wondering if either of you would be willing to share your language statement. I would love to see that. Thank you. I'll email you. Also, a quick comment regarding transcription. May I recommend Scribby? It is an automatic transcription software and very affordable and works really well. My question. So yesterday I went to the GTA Fellows session. The Pierce Center has a fellows program just for grad students, and they have a separate faculty fellows program. And I'm interested in setting something up like this at my institution, and noticed that you all combined grad students or grad student singular and faculty, and wondering if there are considerations, logistical and otherwise, for including them or keeping them separate.
That's a good question. We only had, one graduate student signed up. I think she was in biology. Were there two? Oh, there were two. There was one in education too. Yeah, we weren't sure, and we ended up just letting anybody join who found out about it. And I think that was a good decision. And I think, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of benefits for graduate students being able to learn from and hear from folks who have more experience, especially outside of, in English, we're used to our graduate students teaching their own classes, right? But that doesn't actually occur in a lot of other disciplines as graduate students, it's more assistant or apprenticeship type of thing. So I think in that sense, I think there's a lot to gain because they're going to be learning from folks who actually in their disciplines or related disciplines who have actually had a lot more experience teaching than they will have had. So I don't see any, I don't know. Okay, Stephen disagrees. Let's go over to him.
I mean, that's a totally legitimate perspective, but I can also see arguing that grad students should have their own sort of autonomous space where they're not completely dominated by the professors. I mean, we had key professors who like to talk, and it might have been difficult to, I mean, we like to talk, but it might have been hard so sort of my background, I do a lot of international graduate student training in a variety of ways. And I could see that they might have some difficulty in really exploring the ideas because of, some cultural deference, but also some linguistic insecurity, all kinds of things. So this conversation we just had, that's what we were talking about. I don't think there's a definite answer, but there's a judgment call to be made.
Yeah, so there you go. No answer, sorry. And yeah, that's it. Okay, yes, please.
Thank you, appreciate it. So this is a complex question, and I think all of us are thinking about this. It's one thing to have conversation among willing, small group of people who are eager to be involved. It's another thing to change policy at the university or to find ways to convince the university to change policy. And so my question is, how could one use the energy that, or how could you use the energy that you generated from this group to have a more sustainable and more significant impact on the university? And when I ask that, I'm asking about how might you, for example, send surveys to business people in the community to ask them about the impact of the kind of work that you're doing and their expectations for students, or could you do that? And how might you get panels of professionals talking about these things? I just think that until there's serious cultural change beyond the institution and these small, very willing and comfortable places, these things are not going to have a big impact. Just curious.
Those are great ideas. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those ideas. I mean, because we haven't obviously done that. I think those are great ideas. One thing, that I will just add, and I think this has come up in several sessions I've attended here, is sort of writing professionals are really in great positions to be advocates for change systematically, because we do work collaboratively across so many any given space, right? Whether that be within the university or beyond. I'm an associate professor, I'm tenured, and I do have kind of a reputation on campus for being very pro-diversity. I'm a co-founder of a group, an online group that's anti-racism group on campus. So people know my name. I'm also a chair of a committee, a university-wide committee that works on gender issues at the university level. And so people know who I am, and I think that, and I do think, and also as a writing person, I've done a lot of, I've done like celebrations of student writing and stuff like that. And so faculty across disciplines do know who I am on various levels. And I think that is, and I'm not saying that because I have a big ego or anything, it's just the reality. And somebody like Steven, right, he's the director of the Center for Writers. He runs classes for graduate students, and he works for graduate students across all disciplines. He helps them learn how to teach, and that is requiring so much collaboration with chairs and faculty across disciplines. And so I think those are the ways we have to think about how do we leverage reputation on campus in a way, and I think we can and we should. I mean, we need to sell ourselves and help people make connections, because guess what? My expertise in writing means I can talk about diversity in particular ways that maybe are going to be new and interesting. And, if I have a pretty solid collaborative relationship with others on campus, they're going to trust that, right? And so I do think that kind of stuff is really important, thinking about how we can get advocates. But your ideas too, going beyond the university, and I heard Chris, you said like alumni, reaching out to alumni, bringing them on campus. I mean, all of those are really great ideas. So we haven't done, but I think that's a great idea to help sort of underline how important this stuff is. That's great.
So when we've done work with our writing center staff on linguistic diversity and anti-racism, they're noticed a tendency that race gets subsumed into nationality. Essentially, the discussions of linguistic diversity turn into discussions of bilingualism without attention to the distinctions that maybe somebody from the U.S. who's a racialized minority might experience versus somebody from the bring it seemed like maybe that happened from what you'll present. You try to tease that out a little bit and to kind of say, remember, it's not just international students that we're talking about here.
So I don't think we explicitly tried to tease that out. I think we allowed the participants' target of concern, which was primarily, but not exclusively. You could see them teasing it out. Like in one of those samples, is like, are they African American, whatever. I can't remember exactly what they said, but I mean, I think we come from a field where like it really comes from the language diversity that's domestic, in composition studies, whereas our experience at some place like NDSU, that language diversity looks very different because it's mostly international. So I see what you're saying, but I'd be a little hesitant to like making that the dominant issue, especially if the participants themselves are finding ways to see, sort of not equalize, but sort of see analogs to all different kinds of language diversity. And I guess that's my non-answer.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I did see, like, there was our nursing professor, she was making connections to gender and language in really interesting ways, and that, you know, and so I do think we deliberately, at least at the very beginning, because of the stuff that we asked um, them to read by Libby. So we did, at least at the very beginning, talk a bit about the fact that language diversity might look like something other than the multilingualism that you might automatically assume is what we mean. Whether or not that continued through, it's really important with faculty development, obviously, to start with wherever our participants are at. But I think also, though, much of what we can say about being linguistically inclusive for a multilingual student improves the experience for everybody. And of course, there are different power balances, there's different dynamics, right? But I think in a lot of ways, making things accessible in one way help everyone. So I don't know. That's helpful. Yes.
I want to add anything here, but I'm speaking from of experience as a former just not American. I feel we problem marketing. What is that problem? That's agree that this problem we benefit everybody. And I remember that after I left council and went to Michigan to work, a Southern student would stand out, and they'd be afraid to speak because their accent stood out. They're Americans, they speak American English. What does that mean? So these are the questions that I think we shouldn't shy away from.
I agree, and thank you. I want to make sure our Zoom folks are not ignored. Is there anything in the chat or anybody on Zoom wanting to speak? I'm checking our time. We have 5 minutes left. Just raise your hand if you would like to speak. Anybody else? Other questions, comments?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much you got a chance to think about this, but I'm curious about kind of the participants that you lost over time and what factors led to them leaving, and if that gives you any insights about, things you might do differently or structures that would better support doing this work, if it was just a time issue, if there were other things that came up.
Thank you. Who wants to answer that? Me?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
we've talked about it.
And first of all, we did it over 2 semesters. So people's schedules change. And that's
what most
we noticed a big difference between the first semester and the second semester. So that's why one of our recommendations is if you're going to do this, try to do it all in a single semester. But secondly, I think that I can say I lost it. There was some other factor. I was 100%.
I would say one of the other reasons we're suggesting, I don't know if we put it this way, but for facilitation, shut up a little bit more. One, I wanted that as a recommendation because of the data collection. I want their words there instead of our words, but we worried a little bit that we talked over, some people as they're working things out, sort of enjoying them. And we worried a little bit that we alienated them. So giving them the sort of freedom, and would you put that in a different way? Freedom and space?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at the very beginning, a lot of it is about education because you have to define terms. You have to explain what you mean by language diversity, right? Like recognize nuances, all that stuff. And so it's easy for us to go into lecture mode and instructor mode. And meanwhile, our participants probably came because they want really practical advice, right? And that really didn't come until like the 3rd or 4th session. about what they can actually do in their classroom. So that's, you know,
But they also had a lot of life experiences that we could have had them share more of that, you know, allow more of that. Where their storytelling, as Ibtisam said.
yeah. And also we didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And we do think that money would have helped, like stipends or whatever. And as with many diversity, you know, equity and inclusion initiatives, that's always a problem, right? There's a lot of times very little money, at least at North Dakota State University and possibly other places like that. So that for sure would have helped things. So I think we're basically out of time. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your time. Thank you on Zoom for coming, and thank you for our illustrious soon-to-be doctor over here who who helped us a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, yeah, I'll let you do this stuff.
So,